The wind that night was a living thing, a wild and merciless creature that screamed across the Montana plains. It clawed at the wooden boards of Jacob Turner's barn and rattled the loose shingles on the roof like a warning from the heavens. The kind of cold that didn't just bite the skin but burrowed deep into the bones had settled over the land. The world was silent but for that wind, until Jacob heard a sound that didn't belong. It was faint, almost lost to the storm. A dull thud against the barn door, then another, softer, as if something heavy had slid down the wood and collapsed. Jacob froze where he stood, his breath clouding in the air. He had been checking on the horses before turning in, a lantern in one hand and a worn wool coat wrapped tightly around his shoulders. The horses inside stirred nervously, snorting and stamping, their unease catching his attention. He set the lantern down and unlatched the door. The gust that burst through hit him like a hammer of ice. He raised the lantern high, its warm light slicing through the swirling snow, and that was when he saw her. At first glance, he thought it was just a pile of cloth, a blanket, maybe something the wind had blown across the yard. But then it moved, slowly, weakly, like the last flicker of a dying flame. Jacob's heart tightened. He strode forward, boots crunching through the crusted snow, and knelt beside the figure. It was a woman. Her hair was tangled with frost, her lashes heavy with ice crystals, her lips blue. The fabric of her dress, white once, maybe, was stiff and torn, trailing behind her like a shredded ghost. She was barefoot, her feet raw and purple from the cold. A lace veil clung to her shoulder, half buried in snow. "Ma'am," he said roughly, voice trembling despite himself. "Can you hear me?" No answer. Only the faintest twitch of her hand. Jacob pressed his fingers to her neck. A heartbeat. Slow, weak, but still there. He didn't think twice. He scooped her up into his arms, the weight of her barely anything, and carried her toward the house. Inside, the air was only a little warmer. The fire had burned low, just glowing embers left in the hearth. Jacob kicked the door shut behind him and lowered her gently onto the rug near the fire. His hands moved on instinct, more certain than his thoughts. He threw kindling into the fireplace, added logs, and coaxed the flames until they roared to life. Then he grabbed one of his wool blankets from the chair, wrapping it around her trembling form. He knelt beside her, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "Come on now," he murmured. "Don't you give up on me." Her skin felt like ice. He hurried to fetch a kettle, poured hot water into a tin cup, and held it near her lips. She stirred, just barely. A faint sound escaped her throat, something between a sob and a sigh. Her eyes opened, unfocused, glassy. Where am I?" she whispered. Her voice was the ghost of a sound. "You're in my cabin," Jacob said, his tone gentle but steady. "Name's Jacob Turner. Found you in my barn. You're safe now." Her eyes darted around, confused, frightened. "I didn't mean to," she swallowed hard, shivering under the blanket. "I didn't mean to trespass. I was just cold. I thought maybe I could rest there for a while." "You can rest here instead," Jacob replied, pouring more tea. "You look about ready to drop." She blinked slowly, her lashes trembling. "I walked for hours," she murmured. "Didn't know where else to go. The road just kept going and going." He studied her face more closely then, the smudged makeup, the streaks of dirt over cheeks that must have once been carefully painted. "You're wearin' a weddin' dress," he said quietly. "What happened?" Her lips trembled. She turned her face away. But her voice broke through the silence, low and shaking. "He left me." Jacob frowned. "Who?" "My fiancé," she whispered, and the word caught in her throat like a shard of glass. He said he loved me. But when the time came, he walked away. His family said I wasn't good enough. Said I'd shame their name. He didn't even look at me when he turned back down the aisle." Jacob felt something dark and hot rise inside him, not anger at her, but at the cruelty in those words. "You're talking about one of them Holts, ain't you?" he asked, though he already knew. Her eyes flickered with pain. "Matthew Holt." He nodded grimly. "The Holts owned the land a few miles east, proud people, rich and loud. The kind who thought money could buy them grace. And you just walked away. All this way. Alone." "I didn't have a home to go back to," she said softly. "My parents passed last spring. I thought," her voice cracked. "I thought if I just kept walking, maybe I'd stop feeling anything at all." For a moment, the only sound was the pop of the fire. Jacob watched her hands trembling around the cup. Her face was pale, fragile, but there was a quiet strength there too, the kind that came from surviving what should have broken her. He stood, moved to the stove, and poured her a bowl of broth. "Eat this," he said, setting it in her lap. "Slowly now." She hesitated but obeyed. The steam rose around her face, softening her features, bringing color back to her cheeks. "Why are you doing this?" she asked after a while, voice barely above a whisper. "You don't even know me." Jacob leaned back in his chair, the firelight flickering in his eyes. "Don't have to know someone to help 'em," he said simply. "Cold like that don't care who you are. And I ain't one to let a person die in my barn." Her eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow this time, but something gentler, like gratitude she didn't know how to express. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, she just looked at him, and in that silence, something passed between them, fragile and wordless, but real. After she finished eating, she tried to stand, but Jacob stopped her with a raised hand. "You ain't goin' anywhere tonight," he said firmly. "You rest. I'll keep the fire goin'." She nodded weakly, too tired to argue. Within minutes, her eyes closed, and her breathing slowed. Jacob sat back, watching her sleep, the flicker of firelight dancing across her face. He wondered what kind of man could walk away from someone like her. There was pain there, yes, but also courage, like the last light before a storm fades. Outside, the wind began to die down. Snow still drifted across the plains, but inside the cabin, warmth bloomed, fragile, flickering, but alive. Jacob leaned forward, stirring the fire, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel quite so alone. He didn't know her name, didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But he knew one thing for certain, the world had brought that woman to his door for a reason. And come morning, he'd find a way to make sure she never faced the cold alone again. The long Montana winter finally gave way to spring. Snow melted into glistening puddles, and the frozen earth softened beneath Jacob Turner's boots. The hills that had once been white and lifeless were now speckled with green, the first shy blades of grass, the first daring blooms of yellow daisies. The air smelled different now, clean and full of promise. It had been 3 months since that stormy night when Jacob had found the stranger in his barn, and nothing on his ranch, or in his heart, had been the same since. Her name was Clara. He learned it one morning when she was strong enough to sit by the window, her fingers wrapped around a mug of tea. The sunrise had poured through the glass, painting her face in soft gold. "Clara," she'd whispered, as if reminding herself that she still existed. It had been the first time he'd seen her smile. Since then, that name had become the sweetest sound in his quiet little world. Clara had settled into life on the ranch as naturally as the flowers returning to the fields. Every morning, she'd rise before dawn and step outside barefoot, breathing in the crisp air, helping Jacob feed the chickens or gather eggs. Her laugh echoed across the yard, a sound so full of life that even the horses pricked their ears to listen. Jacob watched her sometimes when she didn't notice, the way she tied her hair with a ribbon, the way she hummed while sweeping the porch, the way she looked at the wide Montana sky like it held all her new beginnings. She had color in her cheeks again, and a light in her eyes that hadn't been there the night he found her half-frozen and heartbroken. The townsfolk had started to talk, of course. The widower and the runaway bride. Some called it charity, others scandal. But Jacob didn't give a damn about gossip. He'd been alone for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to hear laughter in his house, or to find someone waiting at the table when he came in from the fields. Clara didn't just warm the place, she brought it back to life. One evening, the sun was dipping low over the hills, setting the world aflame in orange and pink. Jacob found Clara sitting on the fence that overlooked the pasture. Her skirt fluttered in the breeze, and the soft light caught her hair, turning it into threads of gold. She looked so peaceful that for a moment, he just stood there, afraid to break the stillness. "You've been quiet today," he said finally, his deep voice breaking through the hum of the wind. She turned, smiling faintly. "Just thinking," she said. "About what?" She looked out toward the horizon, where the mountains stood like ancient guardians. "About how far I've come," she said softly. 3 months ago, I didn't think I'd live to see spring." Jacob nodded, leaning against the fence beside her. "You've done more than live, Clara. You've built yourself back up." "I had help," she said, glancing at him. "You found me when everyone else turned their backs." Jacob shifted his weight, looking down. Compliments made him uneasy. Didn't do nothing special, he muttered. Just did what any decent man should have done. Don't say that, she said gently. Most men wouldn't have stopped. Most would have shut their doors. He met her gaze then, and for a moment neither of them looked away. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full of everything they hadn't yet said. After a moment, Jacob cleared his throat and reached into his pocket. Got something for you, he said. Clara blinked. For me? He nodded, handing her a small wooden box. It was smooth and simple, carved by his own hands in the evenings after supper. Ain't much, he said quietly, but I figured you might like it. Clara opened the box, her breath catching when she saw what was inside, a delicate silver locket, old but polished until it gleamed. Inside it, pressed carefully, was a tiny dried daisy and a folded slip of paper. She opened the paper, and her eyes filled with tears when she read the 2 words written in Jacob's rough handwriting, New Beginnings. Her voice trembled. Jacob, this is beautiful. He shrugged, awkwardly rubbing the back of his neck. Used to belong to my late wife's mother. Figured it ought to go to someone who knows what it means to start over. Clara closed the locket, holding it to her chest. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The sky behind her was turning violet now, and the world felt still, like it was holding its breath. Finally, she whispered, You've given me more than a new beginning. You've given me a reason to believe again. Jacob's heart thudded in his chest. Clara. She turned toward him, eyes bright with unshed tears. When I came here, I thought my life was over. I thought no one would ever look at me again without pity or shame. But you never asked questions. You never judged me. You just saw me. Jacob swallowed hard. His hands, rough and calloused from years of work, clenched at his sides. You make it sound like I'm some kind of saint, he said, his voice low. Truth is, I just didn't want to see another soul freeze in the dark. Clara shook her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. No, Jacob. You gave me warmth when I had nothing. You gave me a home. And if you'd let me, I'd like to give something back. He frowned slightly, confused. What do you mean? She took a deep breath. I mean I don't want to leave. I don't want to start somewhere else. I want to stay here, with you. The words hit him like a blow to the chest. His first instinct was to look away, to hide behind the stoic walls he'd built long ago. You sure about that? He asked quietly. You deserve more than a worn-out ranch and an old fool who talks to his horses. She laughed softly, stepping closer. You're not a fool, Jacob Turner. You're the kindest man I've ever met. You gave me life when I'd given up on mine. He finally looked up at her. The fading light painted her face in golden rose, her eyes full of something that made his throat tighten. Clara, he murmured, almost afraid to say her name aloud. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers small and warm against his. You once said nobody deserves to die cold and forgotten, she whispered. Well, nobody deserves to live alone and unloved either. The last of the sunlight slipped away, leaving them in the soft silver of dusk. The air between them was heavy with meaning. Slowly, Jacob reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch lingered. I reckon, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion, we both been through enough cold. Maybe it's time we kept each other warm. Clara smiled through her tears. I'd like that. He leaned forward then, hesitantly at first, but when she closed the distance between them, it felt as natural as breathing. The world around them was quiet, just the rustle of wind in the grass, the creak of the old fence, and somewhere in the distance, the low nicker of a horse settling down for the night. From that night on, everything changed. The barn where he had found her, cold, lifeless, and alone, became the place where they built something new together. They repainted it, fixed the roof, and planted wildflowers along its sides. Clara insisted that the barn deserved a second chance, too, just like her. Sometimes, when the evening light fell across the fields, Jacob would watch her standing by the door of that barn, a soft smile on her face. And every time he did, he felt the same quiet gratitude that had filled his heart the night he'd carried her from the snow. He had found her on the edge of death, abandoned and broken. But in saving her, he had unknowingly saved himself. And so the ranch no longer echoed with silence but with laughter, warmth, and the soft hum of love rediscovered. The man who once lived alone with his ghosts now shared his days with a woman who'd taught him that even the coldest hearts could thaw. That sometimes, the greatest miracles weren't loud or sudden, but born quietly, in the warmth of two hands finding each other after the storm.